This week, I tried to do something simple. I tried to count every computer chip in my house. I started confidently with the phone, the laptop, and the television, then the washing machine, and then, a little absurdly, the toothbrush. Somewhere in the kitchen, standing over a rice cooker, I gave up. The honest answer is that I own hundreds of them, and I could not tell you where a single one was made. Now, I should say where I stand, because this video is going to end with an opinion. I think the way the world makes chips is genuinely dangerous, and we should be nervous about it. But I also think it is one of the most remarkable things our species has ever pulled off. And honestly, the danger and the achievement turn out to be the same thing. That is what makes this worth the next 10 minutes of your time. Because the stakes have stopped being abstract. When chips briefly ran short a few years ago, car makers, by one widely cited estimate from the consultancy, Alex Partners, lost over $200 billion in sales, factories stood still for want of parts, and second-hand cars started gaining value like property. All of that from missing components that cost a few dollars each. And if you asked most people where chips actually come from, they would say China, or maybe just Asia, somewhere vague and comfortably far away. But you know what? That is not really true. The real story is stranger and much more fragile. Almost every advanced chip on Earth is made by one company, on one island, using machines that only one other company in the world knows how to build. So here is what we are going to do. First, I want to show you why making a chip became the hardest thing humans do at scale. Then, how the whole planet quietly ended up depending on a single company in Taiwan. And finally, the big one. What happens now that every government on Earth has noticed, including ours? First up, the making. Every chip begins as sand. Ordinary quartz, melted down and purified until it is 99.99999% pure silicon, 9 nines. For context, that level of purity is like making one mistake, and only one, in 30 years of continuous work. Then the silicon is grown into a single flawless crystal, and sliced into wafers. Onto that wafer, we print transistors, which are tiny electrical switches, and this is where the numbers stop sounding like engineering. A modern phone chip carries somewhere between 15 and 20 billion of them. That is roughly 2 switches for every human being alive in a square smaller than your thumbnail. Each one smaller than a virus. To print something that small, you cannot use ordinary light, because ordinary light is too blunt. So the industry spent about 2 decades, and by most estimates well over $10 billion, learning to use extreme ultraviolet light instead. It works by firing a laser at falling droplets of molten tin tens of thousands of times a second, creating tiny explosions that glow at exactly the right wavelength. I am not making this up. This is how your phone gets made. Exactly one company on Earth can build that machine, ASML in the Netherlands. Each machine has around 100,000 parts, ships out in 3 cargo planes, and costs north of $150 million. Nobody else makes one. Not because nobody wants to, but because it rests on 4 decades of accumulated, mostly unwritten knowledge. And there is no shortcut for 4 decades. Then you need a building to put it in. A modern chip fabrication plant costs north of $20 billion, which is more than an airport and more than a nuclear power station. Inside, the air is kept thousands of times cleaner than a hospital operating theater, because at this scale, a single invisible speck of dust lands on a wafer, the way a boulder lands on a motorway. So that is the making, and it is the closest thing we have to magic that ships on a schedule. Which brings us to the second question. How did all of it end up in one place? See, in 1987, a 56-year-old engineer named Maris Chung started a company in Taiwan with a strange idea. His company would design nothing and invent no products of its own. It would only manufacture for anyone who asked, and at the time this looked almost humble. It turned out to be one of the great business ideas of the century, because it meant thousands of companies could design chips without ever needing to afford a factory. And here is the part I find genuinely uncomfortable. Nobody decided that the world's chips should come from one island. There is no villain in this story. Every year, every company simply made the sensible choice, the efficient choice, the cheaper choice. And 40 years of individually sensible choices compounded into a collectively absurd outcome. That one company, TSMC, now makes, by most estimates, around 90% of the world's most advanced chips. Let me translate that. The phone in your pocket, the laptop I'm recording this on, the servers behind nearly every app you open today, the brain of almost every new car. Different logos on the outside, and the same few buildings on the inside, sitting on an island roughly the size of Kerala in one of the most contested stretches of water on Earth. The Taiwanese have a name for this arrangement: the Silicon Shield. The theory is that making chips this essential protects the island because no one can afford to break it. Maybe. I hope we never find out. But an insurance policy that only works if the fire never happens is not really an insurance policy. It is a hope with paperwork. And honestly, this is where I get a little irritated because none of this was a secret. Engineers and analysts wrote warnings about it for 20 years. And the world's governments, nearly all of them, discovered the problem only when their car factories went quiet and then acted surprised, as if geography was a plot twist. Which brings us to the big one. What happens now? In short, the largest industrial spending spree in modern history. America passed a CHIPS Act worth about $50 billion. Europe answered with a similar act of its own. Japan is paying handsomely to bring factories back. And India has entered the race too, with a semiconductor mission worth roughly $10 billion, and the country's first major fab now rising at Dholera in Gujarat, built by Tata. Whether that is visionary or late, honestly, it is both. Now, to be fair to the skeptics, spreading factories around the world is not free. Concentration was never stupidity. It was efficiency. And undoing it means paying all of that efficiency back. New fabs in new countries will make chips that cost more, with workforces that are still learning, and some of these celebrated projects will quietly disappoint. Anyone who tells you resilience comes free is selling something. But I think we are learning, slowly and expensively, that the point was never to make chips as cheaply as physics allows. The point is that the thing our whole civilization now runs on should not have a single point of failure. We spent 40 years optimizing for wonder. We are now paying to buy back resilience. That is not waste. That is the bill arriving. And in the meantime, you are carrying the whole story around in your pocket. Sand from somewhere ordinary, purified in Japan or Germany, printed by a Dutch machine firing lasers at falling tin, inside a Taiwanese building cleaner than surgery, designed in California or in Bangalore, and sold to you as if it were the most normal object in the world. It might be the least normal object you have ever touched. Which brings me back to my kitchen and the rice cooker I gave up counting at. I still do not know where its chip was made. But I do know now what I am actually holding. Hundreds of small monuments to the strangest bargain of our age. We traded resilience for wonder, and we got the wonder. And I remain hopeful because for the first time in decades, the world is treating that trade as a choice and not as a law of nature. They say you should never build your house on sand. We went ahead and built our entire civilization on it. The least we can do, this time, is know exactly whose sand it is.